What if I were to tell you that Russian gas prices were on the rise at the pump? And what if I told you this could be a bad sign for Russia? Some of you might tell me to shove off because I'm some paid-for Ukrainian shill. Believe me, I wish I was. I'm at the airport right now. I'm just leaving Goodfellow Air Force Base where I trained with the firefighters for 3 days, and that trip wasn't cheap. So if you got $5, head on over to ryanfeth.substack.com to support my work. Others might cheer this on as great news, welcome in a dark and trying time for those Ukrainian defenders hoping for some good news. I'm here to tell you the facts, nothing more. When I started this video, I was trying to see how bad the economy was in Russia because of Ukrainian drone attacks. And as much as I'd love to point to the drones and say, look, Russia's about to collapse because of these Ukrainian drone strikes, there's actually way more to it. Russian oil prices, and more specifically domestic gas prices, have been on the rise for a whole lot of reasons. Like any complex system, we can't narrow this down to just Ukrainian drone attacks, although they may have helped. Nor can we link this to a troublesome Russian economy, which may not be a factor at all. Listen, Ukrainian drone attacks have at some point inflicted serious damage against Russian refineries. Some sources say up to 20% of Russian refinery output capacity has been affected. Not bad, Ukraine, not bad at all. But this doesn't explain the recent hikes at Russian gas pumps, at least not entirely. Some of these attacks have been focused on Western Russia, but they didn't hit all of their capacities there. They don't fully explain the higher gas prices for Russian civilians at the pump. And I'll tell you this, when I do research, even on the go, my go-to news source is ground news.
A lot of you know that I'm a pretty centrist guy politically when I do care about politics, but I work for a conservative TV channel as an intelligence analyst. Did you know that President Trump criticized Fox News for allowing a Democratic senator to appear on TV during a government shutdown? And what's kind of interesting is that no centrist news outlets covered this story. It was really up to ground news to let me know about this. They also give the ownership data, the average accuracy, and bias of the publication, so you know who is telling you what to think. And there's this blind spot report which shows you stories you may have missed due to your own personal biases. For example, did you know that President Trump suggests that Canada become the 51st state if it wants to be protected under the United States Golden Dome program? Well, 0 right-leaning outlets covered it. Or did you know that Chicago police were ordered not to respond to a car that rammed into federal agents? 0 left-leaning news outlets covered it. I actually pay for ground news. They don't give it to me for free. It is a vital part of my morning routine. So click the link in the description below, hit the QR code up here, or go to ground.news/Ryan and start getting the whole side of every story.
Now here's where I thought Russian economics came in. Has the combination of inflation and sanctions done something to Russia's ability to purchase gas at cheaper prices? I'll tell you the truth, this is where things get kind of murky. Russia has a real GDP, or purchasing power parity, PPP, on par roughly with Japan. Russia's economy, for better or worse, has become superheated. It has ballooned in size. And much of this is due to the wartime consumption and the government money train that's kind of used to support the war effort. Like everyone's working for the freaking war effort. As an aside here, Russian inflation sits at around 10% per the International Monetary Fund's official data, which is high, but it could be worse. Not bad, Russia, not bad. So the real GDP, PPP, and inflation rates don't really explain rising gas prices at the Russian pumps, at least not fully. Then you have to look at the international market, which you would assume, rightfully or otherwise, is to have some impact on Russian domestic gas prices. China and even India are looking to curtail their reliance on Middle Eastern oil, but demand for Russian oil, while higher in some respects, has actually fallen. And there appears to be some serious pulling and pushing in the oil market. Iran and Russia appear to be losing access to the markets that are demanding their oil. Meanwhile, OPEC members appear to be increasing production efforts, making oil cheaper for buyers. This is likely putting pressure on a cash-strapped Russia that needs foreign money to pay for expensive imports to supplement its war efforts in Ukraine. But Russia has deeper problems. Russian oil production isn't keeping up with demand at home, and it isn't keeping up with the times. A recent Wall Street Journal article found that some projections point to at least a 10% drop in Russian oil output by the end of the decade, putting Kremlin's economy and the petrodollars it is built on in peril. Russian oil production is costly, and the reasons are pretty darn numerous. You see Russians sell their oil, known as Urals blend, at around $61, $65 a barrel, and that sounds great, right? Convert that to rubles. $1 US is 81.73 rubles, at least as of October 3rd, 2025. But that means you have around 5,000 to 5,400 rubles per barrel. Again, that sounds great. But according to a recent article in the Wall Street Journal, Russians spend around $45 per barrel to produce said barrel. So that's about 3,700 or so rubles per barrel in costs, leaving a very slim margin to make money from. Russian oil production costs are eating into their profits. Then add on to this increased demand from the Ukraine wars, and wars are always thirsty for oil, and domestic industries like farming, which are undergoing the harvest, and you have a serious freaking problem on your hands. August 2025 and September 2025 saw record high gas prices at the pumps in Russia, which normally see low prices. Russian oil production, which impacts Russian gas prices domestically, has been dealt a number of blows since 2022. There's sanctions from the European Union and the United States appear to be working. These sanctions keep the Russian oil industry from importing much needed technologies, including critical hardware and software to further exploit and develop reservoirs in the Arctic and Siberia. Another aside here. The Russians probably rely on Western or American tech to sufficiently exploit their oil resources and make much needed petrodollars. The European Union has also adapted this pricing cap on Russian oil products, which means that Russians make less from this market as well. On top of all that, Russian domestic policies geared toward shaping a labor market that's conducive to the war effort in Ukraine has increased labor costs everywhere, including oil production. Welders and other blue-collar workers are seeing salaries mirroring some white-collar jobs. Russians are also seeing increased costs in Ukraine, which means oil is being used there, as are oil-based revenues. Up to 1/3 of Russia's budget and revenue comes from the products of the energy sector, and that proportion is likely to shrink as the production slows. That comes from the Wall Street Journal. It's important to note that as Russian oil exports are a key to its strategy to bring in foreign money, however, all demand internationally is lower for a pariah state like Russia. Yeah, they can sell oil to India and China, but it's a buyer's market. The Russians are desperate, and they need to sell oil at lower prices to offset other OPEC nations' oil. Oil production costs are killing the Russian government and decreasing demand for Russian oil and gas. Russia needs foreign money to support its war effort and to keep its domestic economy afloat. Without it, Russia's in a lot of trouble, and the trouble doesn't stop there. Even before the war, many of Russia's Soviet airfields, mainly Western Siberia and the Volga-Urals region, were starting to run low, leaving oil companies to turn to the harder-to-recover crude in the Arctic and Siberian fields. Russia attempted to exploit oil shale and oil sands, as seen in Alberta, Canada, and Western North Dakota, to increase reliable reserves of oil. The problem is that the sanctions have made this a freaking nightmare scenario because the proper equipment and the software to pull it off are prohibitively expensive or just not available. To make matters worse, and it does get worse, Arctic and Siberian geology make for the exploitation of their oil reserves expensive and less likely to pay for themselves under current market prices. Oil production costs are making a Russian oil exporting economy less lucrative. And in time, that could spell disaster for the Russian economy and the Russian government. 1/3 of the country's revenue streams in from oil exports, but combination of sanctions, geology, a hostile foreign market seem to be like hammering nails in Russia's oil-backed economic wealth. So what will this mean for Russia in the near future? It's hard to say, man. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be rich. But if international sanctions continue well after the Ukraine war, Russia could see a serious decline in its ability to produce and export oil. If Russia manages to have sanctions lifted in the near future, it will likely need serious foreign investments to fully explore the Arctic and Siberian reserves. But this would require a market that offers higher dollar amounts per barrel to make production worthwhile. No matter how you slice it, Russia is staring down this huge economic problem that could, in effect, cripple its ability to produce oil and even support itself economically. Hey, if you like content like this, head on over to ryanbeth.substack.com and you can get this stuff ad-free for about $5. Now, I have a flight to catch. Thank you guys so much for watching.
In the modern age of progress and preparedness, one thing separates the professional from the amateur: appearance. That's why forward-thinking Americans choose Bunker Branding Apparel, the official uniform of those who get things done. Each shirt is precision engineered and field tested under rigorous conditions such as extended YouTube filming operations, Substack editorial duty, and the occasional internet argument. Designed for comfort, durability, and undeniable sense of tactical cool. So remember, citizens, when you're defending democracy, refueling freedom, or simply mowing the strategic lawn, Bunker Branding keeps you mission ready, wrinkle-free, and unmistakably American.